Good morning, and thank you for enjoying it with a six pack. The Scotty Six Pack, your number one podcast, coming at you 6 days a week with all things Wisconsin sports. I'm your host, Kedrick Stumbris, and you can follow me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumbris, and follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. While you are here listening on your podcast platform of choice, hit that subscribe button, hit the follow button. If you're watching on YouTube, which you can do by heading to youtube.com/@Scotty6pack, smash that subscribe button and that like button. Leave some kind comments. And of course, as always, hit that bell so you get notified as soon as we upload a new episode every morning or the occasional emergency pod, which we might get to as we approach the trade deadline for the Milwaukee Bucks. There's not a lot of news coming out of Milwaukee Bucks trade deadline talk today. Some rumors that I want to address, but let's be honest, it's a slow news Monday. I told you when we put the Badgers basketball recap in your feed late on Sunday, I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about on the next episode, and that means I want to get something in your feed, something a little bit shorter. We got to talk vibes for a minute here. Let's go through and just give a brief state of the vibes address for some of these favorite Wisconsin teams we have, and just check up on little news, little tidbits on everything we should be paying a little bit of attention to, because I think despite there not being big news on Monday, there's bits and pieces here and there that let's talk about real quickly before we move along. And first vibe check is Wisconsin Badgers football, where I say the vibes are building. And I know that's not a definitive, good, bad, or middling statement, but the vibes are on their way up. This is a team that I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what it's going to look like. You have some real assistant coaching staff shakeup this offseason. Got a new quarterback coming in Tyler Van Dyke, who we talked about earlier on the show. And this past weekend, you had a whole bunch of junior day visitors. The Wisconsin Badgers football coaching staff loves to pack in those high school juniors this time of year, get them all on campus, do a great official visit session with them, which of course or unofficial visit rather, which of course too, we talked about a little bit, some of those junior day visitors going to the Wisconsin hockey game over the weekend. And I think the Luke Fickell staff typically does pretty well if you look at the numbers on their hit rate for kids that they are able to bring on to campus and what they do. A few more scholarship offers going out this weekend. Some kids that I think are going to commit soon after these junior day visits. I would look for, more news starting to come out as we hit into the spring months here, as we get into some of these more evaluation periods with live camps and all that. You're going to see more and more news coming out on the recruiting front for the Badgers, and that might even start as soon as 2 weeks from now. So should be good vibes building in Madison. Fickell and his staff are really building something down there in Kellner Hall. Wisconsin Badgers basketball. Vibes are a little apprehensive. I myself am reeling myself back a little bit to reality. There was a moment where Wisconsin was putting the beat down on Nebraska, which of course they failed to withstand. But as that beat down was coming on Nebraska, a game that I was definitely nervous about, and I guess nervous about for the right reasons, I was saying, wow, this could be a real national title contender. And no, it's not. It's not. That was never right, regardless of whether I think probably regardless of whether or not Wisconsin beat Nebraska and beat Purdue, unless they just absolutely took it to Purdue, then sure, let's have the conversation, even though I don't think their defense is anywhere near good enough to be that, regardless of the fact. And the defense is not even why they lost to Purdue. So I do mean that when I say, regardless of whether or not you beat Purdue, probably not a national title contender of a team. But this Wisconsin basketball team, reeled out a little bit, thought really they had a chance to compete for the Big Ten title. I don't think that's quite the chance. I think Purdue is going to win this league by at least 2 games. If Wisconsin holds on to that 2 or 3 slot, that's all you can ask for, really. I think it would be fantastic for Wisconsin to finish second in this Big Ten behind Purdue, led by the monster Zach Edey. If you can do that and keep the lead within 2 games, hey, that's excellent. This team's got a really tough road game against Purdue at the end of the season on Zach Edey's senior night. That's going to make it hard to finish tied with Purdue atop the standings. We'll see how it goes. But before Wisconsin gets there, they're going to have to win this game against Michigan. We are going to be previewing that game on tomorrow's episode. Have an excellent guest lined up for that. And of course, Wisconsin also heading to Rutgers this weekend. Also have an excellent guest to help us preview that episode, all lined up for this upcoming week as well. But as we look forward for more of this Wisconsin basketball season, it's okay. It's okay to believe. It's okay to believe. It's okay to enjoy this moment where this basketball team is great. We'll talk about this a little bit on tomorrow's pod, but things could be a lot worse for a team that was just on the border of missing the NCAA tournament and headed to the NIT just under a year ago. Things could be a lot worse. This is fun. Let yourself have some fun, even if you're worrying about getting too sucked in on a team you think is just going to disappoint you. Wisconsin's had 1 disappointing loss. I guess 2 disappointing losses if you count Penn State. But that's life in college basketball. Teams this year in college basketball are losing road games despite being ranked in the top 10 at a rate higher than any other time in the modern history of college basketball. It's a weird year, and college basketball is a weird sport. Not a lot you can do about it. So enjoy the ride. It's going to be a fun, month and a half here as we get through March. I am really looking forward to it. As we continue to talk hoops, let's talk about another team that we're not so certain about the vibes on, and those are going to be the Milwaukee Bucks. Vibes are uncertain, and I think the vibes are, positive, but there's just obviously something missing from this team, something that's just off with this Milwaukee Bucks team. And you're going to have to wait through the trade deadline to see what's going to happen. Grant Williams being tied through some, credible rumor mongering today on the internet, saying that the Bucks and Mavericks have explored pretty direct one-to-one discussions for swapping Bobby Portis for Grant Williams. I think that would be an interesting trade. But lots of Bucks fans really don't want to see Grant Williams based off of his time in Boston. That's fine. I understand it, but we're going to have a better idea of how to talk about this Bucks roster and its deficiencies by the time the trade deadline passes, because this Bucks team is going to have a few different ways that they can get better. They're going to have to look for a defensive-minded player, I think, pretty much regardless, especially if that is a center or a player on the wing, or if you can shore up the backup point guard position a little bit. This Bucks roster needs some help. This bench has been pretty weak this season. Granted, it's just a top-heavy roster. You're going to get that when you have a top-heavy roster, but that's why I think the vibes are uncertain, is just because I feel so unequipped to have conversations about what I think is possible for this Milwaukee Bucks team, what I am expecting from this Milwaukee Bucks team, without knowing what the roster is going to look like the rest of the way. Once we get through Thursday, once we get through the trade deadline, I'll be much more confident in saying how I feel about the vibes of this Milwaukee Bucks team. And so not quite uncertainty. The vibes are definitely weird for the Milwaukee Brewers. What a weird offseason for Milwaukee. You go ahead and give your, top prospect in baseball, Jackson Chourio, a big contract extension before he even plays in the majors, before he even plays a full season at AAA. You follow that up by shoring up your team with a Rice Hoskins signing. Basically the first baseman everyone was clamoring for the Brewers to sign. You say, okay, despite the young roster here, despite the loss of Brandon Woodruff to injury slash contract departure, they're going to compete for another division title, which should be a really fun baseball season in Milwaukee. But then, I don't even know if we've talked about this. We haven't dedicated a whole show to it, but I don't even know if I've mentioned down here. Of course, the Brewers trade Corbin Burnes, and did so in a move that I thought was fine. They're going to end up parting ways with Corbin Burnes after this season. The consensus is that these deals at the trade deadline aren't really inflated. Players' values typically decline if you're giving them up at the deadline, because baseball values that full 162 games of service time that you could get instead for a full season quite a bit. And obviously, it's not going to be 162 games as a starting pitcher for Corbin Burnes, but you get the picture. Give that up. You get two solid-ish prospects from the Orioles in return. An infielder who's definitively a top 100 guy, DL Hall, who's a fringy top 100 guy, but the people that I trust as baseball prospect evaluators actually like DL Hall a bit more. The pitcher that came in return, probably going to be something of a reliever. But then the Brewers made, other pitcher moves today. Traded Ethan Small, who was going to be designated for assignment for cash to the Giants. He was going to have to get picked up anyway by somebody off of the roster. He had to get DFA'd because the Brewers brought in two players in that trade from Corbin Burnes, but only sent out the one, of course. And then Brewers did sign somebody in response as well. I don't know. Been a weird offseason. Just not entirely sure what they're doing. Now, there seems to be pretty significant rumblings about the Brewers being willing to take calls on just about anybody on the roster, in terms of veteran guys, at least. Going to be willing to talk about, trading Willy Adames, talk about trading Devin Williams. I get it. This Brewers front office seems to be taking some time this season to prepare for, another 2-3 seasons from now, where they think that the window is going to be wide open for them to go out and compete, considering the young core of guys that they have. It's been nice to see them, still tread water and still field a, mostly competitive team in NL Central that is probably bad. But I think the Cubs will probably be favored to win it. So it should be an interesting season of baseball in Milwaukee. Just unsure what they're trying to do. The Rice Hoskins signing made it really seem like they were going to go out and compete for the division title this year. And now I'm not so sure that is their goal. Their goal might be more evaluation and loading up while they get rid of some expiring contracts. So weird vibes in Milwaukee, because I think it is weird to trade your best player, but also go out and sign a free agent at a position that you really needed. So I don't know. Weird. But let's end on a positive note. And what could be more positive than the Green Bay Packers, where the vibes are great. The vibes are great. I mean, what can you complain about? Our national nightmare is over with Joe Barry fired as the defensive coordinator. Jeff Hafley is a hire that I very much like at defensive coordinator. There's been some shuffling around in the defensive assistant coaching staff. We had talked about on this show where, most of those assistants were going to be given an opportunity to stay on the staff. Seems like Jeff Hafley's bringing in some of his guys. Some of those other folks are leaving maybe on their own accord. Seems a little unsure, but Hafley's rounding out his staff, making some changes. I like, I wouldn't have minded if any of the guys stayed, but I also like that Hafley is very much unafraid to make his own uh, fingerprints seen on the defensive coaching staff. I think that is good. And then a weird little tidbit of news popping today where the Philadelphia Eagles are going to open the season for the NFL on a Friday night. So the NFL will have their Thursday night season opener, which they always have. But then the Eagles will play on Friday in week 1 on the regular season. They will host a game in Brazil. The Green Bay Packers, of course, are slated this season to travel to play an away game at Philadelphia. There's an interesting, little chance there that the Green Bay Packers could kick off week 1 on a Friday night in Brazil against the Philadelphia Eagles. And I know the Packers don't like to play these international games. They did just play one in 2022, so they'd only be 2 seasons removed from one. And do have to play one every 8 years. So I don't know. I know the bigger thing for the Packers is, rather than just playing that game, they really don't want to lose the revenue from losing a home game. So maybe this is a scenario in which the Packers are more inclined to not push back as hard on that game, especially because you don't have to fly overseas, mess up your body clock all that much. Of course, you have a long flight to Sao Paulo, but you do not have the time change to deal with as much. And the flip side of that is, okay, well, then, and I don't know exactly how the NFL, employs this 8-year clock, but you otherwise might reset that 8-year clock, 6 years early and say that the Packers have to go back out to play internationally again very soon. And maybe that's not something the Packers want to do. So will be fascinating to see if the Packers and Eagles end up playing in Brazil in week 1. I would kind of want to go. And I know that seems incredibly silly, and I don't even know if I would be able to do it. But I think I would go. It seems like the wrong reason to go to Brazil. But I think I would, you know, flirt with the idea. Would be fun. I don't know. I don't know if I could pull it off. But yeah, that is your Wisconsin sports state of the vibes address. Thank you very much for tuning in. Tomorrow on the show, we are going to have a great guest join us to preview Wisconsin basketball at the Michigan Wolverines and the fighting, slapping Juwan Howards. We'll be talking that game, recapping that game, and then previewing the game with another great guest that Wisconsin basketball is going to play against Rutgers this upcoming weekend. So stay tuned to the feed. We got a lot more stuff coming up this week. We'll probably end up hitting something in here this week, emergency pod or otherwise, when the Milwaukee Bucks, I assume, make a move at the trade deadline here, coming up relatively quickly. So stay tuned to the feed. But otherwise, I have been your host, Kedrick Stumbris. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Skinny Six Pack podcast on your platform of choice. Wherever you find your podcasts, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, leave a review, 5 stars, kind comments. It really, really does help us get this show out to more people and talk more Wisconsin sports, bring on more great guests. You can also watch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@Skinny6Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. I've been your host, Kedrick Stumbris. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter @Kedrick Stumbris and follow the podcast @Skinny6Pack. Go Pack Go on Wisconsin, Bucks in 6, and some Brewers thing.